Tyler Finn. I lead community for Spot Draft, and I am super excited to be introducing our two fireside chat panelists, CLM experts for this webinar focused on if your team is CLM ready. We've got Akshay Verma, Spot Draft's COO, also a man who has done this before, CLM implementation at both Coinbase and in a slightly different way at Facebook. And he's got a bunch of questions prepared for Lucy Bassli, founder at InnoLaw Group, and the woman who led commercial legal ops through CLM implementation at Microsoft and Snowflake, two other companies that all of us have heard of. Also the author of a few books, which you can see behind her. With that, Akshay, let me hand this off to you for a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Really excited for this conversation. I've known Lucy for a while. I've certainly admired her work for even longer. And when I decided to take the role at Spot Draft, I had texted her and said, "Hey, we're finally going to get a chance to like really work together." So I'd say I know we've done a few little things in the last couple of weeks, but I'd say this is our first real kind of in-depth conversation. So I'm excited for you to share some of your industry expertise with our viewers. We're going to keep it a fairly casual conversation, hopefully have some really good takeaways, and see where some of the poll questions and any questions from the audience take us in the conversation. It's always kind of nice to not be totally locked into a particular type of having a conversation. So let's see where it takes us. So Lucy, before we get started on kind of being CLM ready, that's the theme for today. I think personal stories have a real impact on how we do things and why we do things. And I'd love to hear from you. You've obviously been in legal operations for a long time at one of the largest companies, if not the largest market cap company now, I think, on the planet. And as a legal ops leader, there's a ton of work that you could choose to do and focus in on and specialize around. It could be spend or outside counsel management or e-billing or knowledge management or broad technology. But for you, there was something about CLM that really spoke to you. It became a passion. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of where that started and how it's brought you here.
Sure. So I think like with every career path, there's some of it's a little serendipitous. There's a little luck, a little timing, a little bit of everything sprinkled in. There was definitely, I was a commercial transactions lawyer. I was the main lawyer for procurement globally at Microsoft, and that was a team of, fluctuated, but well over a dozen attorneys and paralegals at any given time. And so I was a regular lawyer, let's just call it at first. And very quickly realized that I can continue lawyering the contracts, which is really the editing, the redlining, the negotiation, word for word, what I've come to call really the inside of the four corners of the document. I could continue doing that, and my team could keep fighting one contract at a time at a volume that, of course, was growing and getting crazy. And our business partners in procurement were always frustrated. Nothing was ever fast enough. I mean, it was all of that quickly, just naturally, intuitively led me to ask questions of why, how should this work? So the why and the how about the four corners of that contract, how they flow around the company, when it goes to whom, who's touching it, all of that kind of became an obvious place for me to start poking at. So I think long story short, I wasn't running legal ops. There actually wasn't a centralized legal operations function at Microsoft for a really long time. I just realized that what I was doing was an operation because I changed the way people touched contracts. Which people? We outsourced. We created templates and playbooks and policies and guidelines and worked with procurement. And we really changed a bunch of stuff over the course of 10 plus years. It was a long journey. And then I realized, oh, wait, that's actually a legal operation. It was taking my legal job and operationalizing it. So I didn't have a list of things to choose from. I didn't have to think, well, what's the priority for the department? The department's enormous. There were efforts running already in their kind of natural homes around spend management or matter management and all that stuff. So mine was kind of its own, and it grew on the side a little bit. And it was really only towards the end of my time there, and I spent 13 years at Microsoft, that I stepped into a formal legal operations role and took under an umbrella, brought with me the CLM operations or contracting operations, and then brought in spend management and matter management. So it's interesting. Where I see it now is so many law departments are prioritizing and chasing their top pain points. And they're always, everyone I think I've talked with, it's a race between kind of the spend management problem, contracts, matter management. It's maybe those three. And sometimes spend and matter management overlap. So really you're kind of like, help me with my money and my workload, and then help me with contracts. It feels like it's always a top priority. So
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we've all heard the old adage that contracts are the lifeblood of your business, and they are. You shouldn't run a business without some level of contracts.
Yeah.
But contracts are the lifeline, and every company has them. How do you tackle them? How do you tackle them, right? And the CLM is right now a hot topic. It's a hot topic in technology, but is CLM tech really the answer? And I like to remind everybody that CLM, contractor lifecycle management, is it's not a piece of technology. It is not a solution. It is not an answer. It is the existence of very complex processes and corporate functions that are a very, very broad combination of people, processes, tools, rules, really in everything that touches the contract. But it feels like CLM has lost its footing a little bit, and now it's getting, first of all, confused with tech. I need CLM. I need a CLM. We need a CLM. Guess what? You have CLM. It might be terrible. It might be exhausting and painful, but contract lifecycle management is happening, and perhaps happening poorly, around the company. So what is CLM, and how do you tackle it? And before we jump to technology, let's just talk about a couple of quick hits, all of which you can read in books, or if you need help falling asleep at night. But really, we've tried to simplify it as much as possible to not be overwhelmed. Don't jump to tech. Just don't. We love our friends in tech. Thank you for our friends in tech for hosting this webinar. But it can only be successful for them and for the users if you've done other things before. So that ecosystem of contract lifecycle management is tackling the people problem. Who's touching contracts? Where? Why are they touching them? And which departments are they? Should they be touching them? How are they touching them? So think of it as kind of people. Think of it also as policy. What are the rules around which contracting exists in your company today? Who's designated some of these rules? Why? Why is this a contract? Why is it even a contract? Can you just agree to this via email? Is there a chicken and egg thing happening? Is there a tail wagging the dog, perhaps, where suddenly there are contracts created without them needing to be contracts? So that kind of falls in this policy bucket. What are the policies at the company around contracting? And then, of course, process is really that thread that puts together the people touching contracts for whatever reasons they think they're supposed to be touching contracts. In some systems, maybe not. So process kind of hugs the people, the technology, and then all the rules at the company. If they're written, unwritten, philosophies, theories, historical reasons for contracting. But CLM is it's an ecosystem. Akshay and I were debating the use of the word, but it really is an ecosystem, right? Akshay, it's all that stuff living together.
Yeah, look, somewhere along the way, early on, there obviously wasn't a ton of technology that was being leveraged for this ecosystem. But somewhere along the way, the distinction between and the importance between the people in the process got really kind of separated from the technology itself. Like, do you have a point of view on kind of either when that happened or why it happened, and why we tend to focus so much on the technology piece? And we'll get into the kind of the
Sure.
getting CLM ready in a minute here. But why do you think we tend to, and when I say we, I mean, legal departments and lawyers and contract managers and legal operations, why do we tend to focus on the technology piece so much?
Yeah. I think honestly, the rise in the technology is what's driving the focus. Suddenly, there's this fury of activity around CLM technologies related all around CLM, and that's caused a little fury, a little flurry of activity for sure. Maybe a little fury in some of us as well. It's caused FOMO. Everybody's fearing missing out. The rise of AI, the huge ingestion of money that happened over the last 3 years into specifically CLM technologies really was no different than what happened about 10, well, maybe 12, 15 years ago in electronic discovery, when discovery became electronic. Discovery. I mean, we should do e-contracting. I don't know why CLM was birthed, but it's e-contracting is what has happened over the last, 3 to 4 years for sure. So the problems always existed. Sure, contracting has become more complex with globalization. I mean, yes, the world has changed. Contracting is changing with the world. It's become more complex. But I wouldn't say necessarily the answer was always, let's jump to technology naturally. But technology somehow grew up on the side, and suddenly people realize, oh my God, thank God, finally there's a solution. But for a long time, people like me at my date and age and time in the dinosaur when I was tackling this, it was a people, process, and policy problem. Tech was really just like a good repository. Oh God, I just want to move my contracts from file cabinets down the hall.
Yeah.
So the evolution was happening, and lawyers were trying to figure out how to do contracting better with people and process and policies, and they were levers they were pulling, and things were progressing, of course. And then tech came in, and suddenly everybody forgot about all the other stuff that can be done, and that feverish run to technology happened. Also, the combination of really good marketing and hey, tech is here, buy it, buy it, buy it, buy it.
Yeah. And look, there are plenty of success stories out there with technology. We certainly have them, like most technology vendors do, and those stories speak to buyers, and they want to be a part of that journey because it's powerful for them. And I think, but again, today for us, the real focus is the precursor to the technology. So with that, you guys did a fantastic, Inolaw did a fantastic market study of kind of, here's what's out there, here's what people are saying, here's what people are using with respect to CLM tools, here are their priorities across the department, and here's how CLM tools fit into those priorities, how high they are on those priorities. And here, I'm just going to read a few of those, and we should talk about them. Leveraging technology as a whole is a top priority for legal departments, right? At a time when everyone's trying to get more work done in a more efficient manner. And within the construct of priority as legal tech or legal tech as a priority, CLM, either implementing a CLM tool or changing out their existing CLM tool, is near the top of the technology priority.
Right.
And it's also, for most GCs and CLOs, the most effective legal tech across all roles because it's such an enterprise ecosystem. I think I've said that 7 times now. We're just going to keep going with it, including all the way up to the GC and CLO. So talk a little about how that priority has maybe shifted over the last 5 to 7 years relative to some of the things that we used to hear, maybe around spend or around headcount and things of that nature.
Sure. I think there's another thing that happened in the world. Obviously, COVID happened. People were suddenly remote. Contracts didn't land on your desk anymore. Red pens and markers maybe weren't as used for printing lots of contracts and walking down the hall and collaborating on contracts anymore. So contracting became a little bit different for a lot of lawyers overnight. Number one. Number two, just the rise of new companies, tons and tons of startups for sure, really all over the globe, not just in the US, but startups that needed similar types of contracts in a high volume fashion over and over, who were already born in tech and lived in tech, also started to look to tech for solutions for themselves. The attorneys who were in-house there were pressured to do faster, and they're part of a tech company, and it became very almost, what do you mean? Why isn't your department automating? Why isn't your department optimizing the way the companies are born, young, born in the cloud company? So I think the more, a chicken and egg a little bit, what came first. But I think all of that together, suddenly we saw a mass of a certain level of GCs and law department leaders in a certain age group that were ready for change, that were part of new and growing companies, that were now spending a very important part of their careers in COVID time developing their stance on technology and their ability to be agile. All that together suddenly came to point to an area of legal work in-house that is a problem at every single company. It's the one common problem that every corporate law department has. Everybody deals with contracts, some more than others, different than others. Some have a high volume, low complexity, some have a low volume, high complexity, but contracts are the lifeline of the business. And so for lawyers, it, I think, was a logical place to look for how to do some things better. And by the way, it's a place where the business is first to complain.
Yeah.
Business isn't complaining about how much you're spending on law firms or even headcount, really. I mean, the other problems you alluded to, the business, like, I can't get my business done, and legal's in the way. So I think all that came together.
Yeah, I think that last point is incredibly strong because oftentimes, and I came up against this in my legal operations days, when you're thinking about buying technology, it's not talked about in terms of value enough, right? We talk about the expense. Here's the expense for this next fiscal year for this piece of the tech stack or this combined tech stack. Have you seen, and I think from my perspective, and I worked at two very heavily regulated companies in Facebook and Coinbase. So regulatory scrutiny, regulatory analysis, regulatory risk was near the top of our legal risk profile.
Right.
Contracting was therefore less of a priority. Do you get the sense that GCs and CLOs don't necessarily understand the value of a strong and efficient CLM system, ecosystem?
Yes, I think that some GCs who are new to the role, takes a while for them to embrace and appreciate how directly connected to the business process they are, how directly impactful the legal team is on the speed of business, the velocity of deal making, revenue generation, revenue creation. So there is a little bit of an evolution that happens when especially newer GCs realize the click that happens. Like, oh, wow, we are connected directly. Our job is no longer regulatory advice only, and that is important, and that is table stakes, especially in highly regulated industry. That is kind of your top priority. But guess what? For the rest of the business, the rest of the company, you're just slowing stuff down. They assume you're taking care of the regulatory risk. They assume you're taking care of all the legal risk. Like, that's table stakes. They don't want to know how that sausage is made. What they want to know is, hurry up. How fast can you help me get my deal done? So that business first legal counselor is going to be the one first that's going to look for, how do I make contracting more efficient? Because that is the direct intersection between the role of legal and business on its face. You see what I mean? You don't have to think long and hard about, oh, look at all the work we do to protect our privacy. And this is no ding or down to all of those core subject matter expert areas. They're required. That's actually really what we should be paying top dollar for, not for processing 10,000 NDAs a year. With all due respect to the lawyers who are still touching NDAs, So, but it's a direct hit to the business if legal slows down in contracts.
We should do an entire webinar on what kinds of resources, if any, should be devoted to negotiating NDAs. I think that's maybe it'll be a 2-minute webinar, but I think it requires
strong opinion warning here.
We'll talk a little bit about the statistics, some specific statistics that are in the market study, but a question just popped up that I think is very related to our concept of this CLM ecosystem being an enterprise system. It's touched upon by almost every single business unit within an organization. And the question is a very simple one, but a powerful one, and one that I don't know that I have a great answer to, which is, who should own the CLM tool? Should it be IT? Should it be procurement? Should it be legal? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it is a very important question, and there's no one right answer. Every single company has its own culture, its own internal power struggles. Let's not pretend this isn't 99% about the people, not just the people who do contracts, the people who run the company, the tone of the GC or CLO, the tone that the C-suite has set. All of that will impact this answer. I've seen it work in a lot of different ways. I've also seen the definition of own be very carefully defined, right? And I think that's important. I hear that all the time. Well, who owns the templates? Even inside of contracting, who owns? I'm like, well, let's explain what it means to own, to contribute as a stakeholder, who's accountable for what part. So because CLM systems these are technology systems, IT typically has a really important role in them if they are being truly implemented as an enterprise-wide solution, which very few still are, in which case then legal, owns. It's definitely a relationship between legal and IT, depending on how broadly you're implementing the system and depending on how broadly you're using the feature set of the system. If you're implementing a super fancy, expensive system and just using it as a repository, legally, you're welcome to own that.
Yeah.
That is your repository. That's kind of easy. If you are implementing it as truly an enterprise-wide solution that's going to work hand in hand with your CRM, hand in hand, the IT really needs to own it as a technology owner, but then you have a business process owner or a business analyst. That ownership should live with a domain expert, be it sales, business dev team, whatever they are, deal desk, procurement if it's on the buy side, and or potentially legal. Should legal own the CLM system? I wish not. Legal's not good at that.
From a technical perspective.
I just wish they wouldn't. They're not good at it. We're not trained for that. And then that's why legal ops starts growing into this octopus, weird tentacle thing of really former IT people seeping into legal ops. It's kind of an unfair career path for those people, frankly. So it should be a coordinated, joint accountability with ownership as to certain aspects is what I would say.
I think that's again a very fair point. And I think we'll speak to this in a little bit around some of the steps of getting CLM ready. But I think it also highlights just how many stakeholders should be involved in the conversation to get CLM ready. Then and one person and one team can champion it, and that's fine. They can bring the idea to the table. But if you're doing that, and if there's one concrete takeaway for any buyers out there who are listening to this, is that if you're thinking about doing it, make sure you understand who else should be brought into that conversation as early as possible to at least have their input and to some extent have them involved in the decision making of what you buy and how you start to implement it.
Amen. Because those people, are whose behavior you're trying to change. Exactly. Or those people are whose skills you need. Yeah. And we said this is kind of all about the people. It's about change management of the people. Yeah. So at its core, it's all a change management exercise. Yes, you're bringing in some technology. It's change management. It's no different than teaching your grandparents to use an iPhone. Yeah. That is change management. iPhone's great. It does what it needs to do. You got to know your audience. You got to know how to shift them from a rotary dial phone to a thing in their hand without any buttons. And I think we forget that, right? Because we're like, wow, the iPhone's so shiny. It's great. It does all these things. All about people and change management. Yeah.
My kids came across a payphone on vacation last time, and they kind of were just staring at it. And I was like, yeah, I haven't really used one of those in a long time. We still have those. We still have those, even if they don't care about use.
Payphone. Right. How charming.
I know, right? Push buttons. Let's talk a little bit about some specific statistics, which I found particularly telling in your market study. Number one, and this kind of hints at is tied to the poll question. 54% of legal organizations or companies have a CLM system or a CLM tool today. Okay. 48% of organizations have foundational work to do. So this is what I think we would call being CLM ready or having done that before you buy or implement or change out. 39% of organizations are dissatisfied with their current CLM system. And 53% of organizations are considering switching their CLM. So between the 39 and 53, there's 14% who are just kind of like, they're just going to sit there and they're just not going to do anything. I think those numbers line up with what I just said. But talk a little bit about, A, does this feel low? It feels a little low. And B, 53% are considering switching their CLM system. Why? Yeah. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. Most of the reasons that they're switching, they're obviously unhappy with something. It's usually because there was a mismatch in expectations between the buyer and the seller of the technology. Rarely do we see it's a core technology problem. If it's a technology problem, it's usually because that tech does not solve the problem that the buyers were hoping it would solve. And again, that it really goes back to expectations. So the switching that we see happening is oftentimes something that could have been prevented with the proper planning and readiness, but they jumped in and now they have something they're unhappy with. What we're also seeing is the switch is oftentimes happening from provider A to provider B, which have very, very similar functionality. And I've asked this question to many of our customers and our prospects that we've talked to and say, why, respectfully, what do you think you're going to get by switching from A to B? And several of them have very openly said, we know they're very similar. We've just lost so much credibility in system A. We have to have a new product. That one kind of breaks my heart, my professional heart. Let me not be dramatic, but it bothers me intellectually because it could have been prevented. And what I see happening, if people are buying too quickly, sellers are selling more than they can deliver, and that is takes two to tango, right? So buyer beware. Shame on the buyer for not doing their due diligence, and also excusing the buyer because oftentimes the seller is simply bamboozling them a little bit too quickly. The due diligence on the buyer side isn't easy, by the way. So all of you who are in the hunt or have already picked and are now going, yeah, what have we done? It's okay. You always have time to pause. You are in control. You are in control. Do not feel pushed into signing on the dotted line because you're not just buying a widget or a doohickey or a gadget you're going to put on your shelf. The implementation takes time and energy. So doing that due diligence, you also might need some help. Ask a friend, call somebody who's been through it. You know, when you're buying your first car when you're 16, you don't go by yourself.
Yeah.
You just don't. I mean, maybe a few of you have, and that's amazing and impressive. Most people I know go with somebody, a trusted family member usually. So this is no different because it is that complicated, and that can prevent some of that dissatisfaction.
Yeah,
that's it. I will say there's
think,
another piece. I will just actually say another piece of dissatisfaction I'm seeing is that from the provider side, from the customer side, the dissatisfaction with the provider, not about the technology. They're unhappy with the service they're getting, non-responsiveness, failing to meet deadlines on promised features. Kind of the lack of any kind of customer success, engagement. They just feel kind of abandoned after implementation. That's another tough pill to swallow because that's hard to change. That's harder to kind of stop and change.
I think it's a really good point. I also wonder, and this is something we talk about at Spot Draft. I think there are other SaaS products that are not CLM tools, which are very different in their utilization. They don't require the kind of living, breathing, almost organism that grows with your company. It can almost be a set it and forget it kind of sale process and then implementation process. And then maybe you have some check-ins on an annual basis, and the tool and the technology is doing what it needs to do. But this is a very hands-on tool. It needs to be used. It needs to iterate because your business grows and evolves over time. How you view your contracts grows and evolves over time. Your risk profile in certain portions of your business grow and evolve over time. And in order for the CLM tool to be able to serve that evolution, it has to also grow and evolve and be configurable over time. And that requires touch points, it requires patience, and it requires a level of engagement that other SaaS products may not necessarily require. And I just wonder if that is part of and I loved your analogy around expectation versus reality, to make sure that as buyers, we are thinking about our expectations appropriately. And we'll talk about a few of those in a minute here. But then also from the seller's perspective, like from the provider perspective, like we should be doing more to help our buyers understand what their expectations should be, not just globally for buyers, but also with your tool, with your service, and how you go about doing things and think about their work that needs to get done.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, setting expectations is key, and it's hard to do that for yourself when when you're the buyer. I've seen some become more and more savvy about it the more they go through the process and really drive the conversations with their providers and really make sure they aren't just receiving information from the seller, but really also driving the entire conversation based on their viewpoint. So when they're told about a feature, be able to translate that feature immediately to what does that really mean for your day job? What does that mean for the problem you're trying to solve? And then iterate it back.
Yeah.
It really is. I heard you say this. Does that mean it will do that for me? And I think that kind of precision questioning is just something we learn from kind of hard knocks. I mean, we learn it over time.
From your perspective, like, do you think there are a top like 3 to 5 items on a list that you can share with our audience that are absolute must-haves as you think about either, and you're in that 53% that's in your market study that are either thinking of switching out their CLM for whatever reason, or thinking about buying a CLM tool?
So for me, when I think about readiness, the first things, and we kind of call these indicators of success. This is our kind of quick test when we talk to any prospect or people who come to us with their CLM woes. We ask, one, do you have some sort of a policy, thresholds, or boundaries of why legal is involved in the contracts they're involved in? And this all presumes that we're talking to law departments that are purchasing a CLM system. Why? I need somebody to think about that as a first step of getting ready. Why do you touch what you touch? And are you clear that that answer is the correct answer going forward? That these are the contracts legal should be touching. The next thing directly connected to that is once you know what you should be dealing with in the law department in terms of contracts, contract types, do you have a clear priority of what you want to tackle first? Are you clear on either the top pain point that you want to tackle because it's the loudest, most annoying thing at the company, or maybe another pain point that you have a really good champion and sponsor in the business who's going to support this big effort in changing in how you're doing contracting? So prioritizing your pain is probably that second step of readiness. And then the third step is really all the stuff that we spend months and months on, with clients, and that is the division of the roles and responsibilities around contracting at the company and the tools and enablement that you need to make that roles and responsibility division effective. What legal isn't touching, then what is the business touching? How are they doing those contracts? What are they accessing? When? Do they have templates? Do they have guides? Do they know how to do the things you want to enable them to do? Those go together because for us, that technology then becomes kind of the freeway. These are these big chunks that you need, and then the technology just makes those all go faster because you can't automate. Can't expect efficiencies from a system if you've got 150 salespeople who've never edited a document, who've never thought about a fallback position on something as simple as invoice timelines, which are a term in a contract that has nothing to do with legal, and it shouldn't. And legal should be empowering the business to do it. Well, if you're going to get a system and you're going to automate the way it's done today, you will not be successful. And I don't even want to go so far as to, I think it's generous to say you're just going to automate a bad process.
Yeah.
That presumes you're even capable of going through with an automation of a process that is that bad. So you simply won't be successful, and you will not receive the benefits you're hoping if you still have legal touching every contract that comes to them from any business person whenever they think necessary, and the business has no role, no clear accountable role in contracting. Can't automate that at all. No CLM system can do it.
Yeah.
So those are my 3, if I'd summarize.
What would you, it's a couple of follow-up questions.
Sure.
What would you say what are the implications of not doing any one of those or all of those before you buy a CLM system? And certainly, I think we can group it all together: dissatisfaction and the initiative or the program fails. But like, what does that actually look like? Is it a system or a tool that just kind of gathers dust?
People just that's exactly right. It seeps away your credibility. It's this kind of black mark on your professional career at that company, for sure. It is a distractor from your day job, for sure, because you are feeling responsible and you're trying to push it forward, but you've got a day job usually in addition. And then what it really looks like is people just go around it. They just simply go around it. And any thoughts and dreams of creating a controlled contracting environment with a system that isn't fully embraced, it's just a dream. It will not happen. People will still have access to email. They will still have access to their internal messaging system, Teams, Slack, whatever you use. That means contracts will continue to flow in all kinds of crazy ways. Oh, and by the way, they're still going to store it on their hard drive. They will still store it on their hard drive or in Docs or Dropbox or Google Drive or wherever it is that they personally feel comfortable storing, because you haven't made it easy and entice them into using a new system. It just won't happen. Yeah. That's what it is.
And in your work in kind of supporting clients through this kind of CLM readiness and this thought process, I'm sure you've come across clients and customers say, hey, this is a lot of work to do up front just to buy a piece of technology. We don't have time for this. Like, we got to get work done. Like, what is your next kind of 2 or 3 conversations with that client? And by the way, the reason I asked that, I imagine there are people in our audience who want to advocate for this. Right. They want to go out and think about a tool, and whether they learned something new during this webinar or they had already come into it with like, what can I actually do to like show people who have to do extra work to get ready to save time later with a tool? Like, how do you navigate that? Help them navigate that conversation?
Sure. Well, and there's a question actually in the Q&A, right? How do you make the argument regarding the value of a CLM system? And in this case, they bought one last year. It's taken about a year to set up, and there are grumblings about how it can help scale, even though it's been so, slow to on the uptake. So I think that's kind of connected. Yeah. It does take time. So in your, the hypothetical scenario you created for me, which is a very real one, is like, thanks, Lucy, this all sounds great. A lot of good food for thought, but we want to buy. Whatever reason, right? We need to buy, we have budget, my GC wants AI, I got to buy something. That's the worst. That scares me the most. But so first, likely they will not become a client, and we probably tell them that we can't help you. If you are going to buy despite my advice, then there's no, I can't help you, and good luck. And then the next step is, well, what should they buy? Then my advice is top priority pain point only. Only solve for the top priority pain point. And I'm going to take a big guess that a lot of people's they forget that their actual top priorities, they can't find their contracts. They immediately jump to bells and whistles and AI and generate, and it's going to read, and it's going to review my atlas, and it's going to create for me a play. And it will tell, and it, once I hear it being talked about like a, I don't know, an attendee at a party, and I kind of go, can you find all your contracts today? No. Yeah. Not once have I heard, yeah, we got them. Never quite got that answer. If you can't find them today, start with that. Start with that. Every good CLM system that claims to be an end-to-end CLM system should have a repository function. It's a clean, organized dumping ground that's easy to search, for starters. And hopefully it has some little reminders and dings it can do. Great. Now you can actually manage and find contracts that you're trying to amend, or that are expiring, or that you have 40 different statements of work hanging off of and you can't find them. Start with that. So if you're jumping, itching, dying, gotta get tech, don't want to do all that stuff you're telling me to do, Lucy, then I'm going to say you got to be able to find your contracts. Start there. On the other end, I will give you one other option. If you're really like, that's so boring, I need something sexier, and I would say intake. Okay. Intake. Stop letting contracts come to your desk via email, Slack, Teams, whatever you use, text. People get contracts attached to their texts and their phone. That's a thank you, COVID output for sure. That's totally from that. Yeah. So then tackle intake. Create a funnel. Force the business to come to you by your rules. Don't be the constant responder and reactor, but control your destiny. Yeah. So I would say buy on that end.
Yeah. How many people take you up on that advice versus they just charge ahead from your perspective?
There's those we never hear from again. We hear from them 6 to 8 months later. That's the funny thing. Like, oh, how'd that go for you? Well, they do. I think for a lot of people, because it is overwhelming, and it is like buying a new car, and they're very excited about the stick shift Ferrari that costs $300,000, that they realize, wait a minute. I help them actually at least think, could you maybe look at a Toyota? Like, could you just, it's okay, Love Toyotas, by the way, right?
Yeah.
They last forever. They get you from point A to point B, and they are inexpensive compared to the
We have
Ferrari that
one
you don't
that has
even know how to drive.
200,000 miles. Totally. Yeah.
Can't drive stick shift. So why are you looking there? So I feel like they hear that. The biggest value I offer at least is personally, I've been there and done it. I lived it. I know what it's like to be sold. By the way, I was oversold on something. I fought to get my money back. They did not like me. They were in business. They were bought out by somebody else. I'm sure they had a great exit. Kudos to them. I bought a bunch of shiny stuff and I was at Microsoft. That one thing was super shiny. And I was like, that's not what you told me. Whoa, they did not like that.
Yeah.
But that's not a fun place to be. Honestly, I had more trouble figuring out how to get the money refunded back into Microsoft's bank than I did the money, but it was a principal thing for me. I'm like, that was frustrating. So people do listen because of the been there, done that. And that's my other word of caution. When you're buying from CLM tech companies and you're being sold to, and there's a great, very capable sales team, a lot of them come from general SaaS sales. A lot of them come from selling other stuff. Respect to the sales process. Make sure that whoever you're buying from understands commercial contracting. They understand what it means to be in your shoes. That's not easy to find at a lot of tech providers. So I think they hear that.
I think that's a fair point, and it's important to have a perspective, and I hope, again, part of my goal at Spot Draft is to use forums like this to educate both providers and buyers that there is the ability, and I don't care what sector of the economy you came from, into CLM tools and buying or selling. You do have the ability to learn what works and what does not, rather than just transition over a particular protocol from your prior roles. And that this is a little bit different. And yes, it is a SaaS product, but it is so high touched by so many different kinds of people who need to touch it on a daily basis that it ends up manifesting very differently across the enterprise.
Yep.
Okay.
It is high touch.
We're gonna wrap up in just a minute, and then I think Tyler's gonna take that question, which I really like as well. Any other big takeaways for being CLM ready? We talked about, by the way, for all the lawyers that are listening to this or will watch this, we all took the bar exam. And one of the things, and whether we took Barbary, which was me back, 20 years ago, or all the new ones that are in all the rage now, the one thing that they hammer into you for essay questions is you have 60 minutes. You read the question, you read your fact pattern. Don't just start typing. I know you want to. Resist the urge. You have time. Slow down to run fast. Take the first 5 to 8 minutes. Think, outline your answer. It will write itself after that. I just think it's such a relevant and familiar analogy for us on CLM. Just slow down a little bit, do the work up front, and your implementation and your adoption and your use of the tool will be that much better. So if that's one kind of takeaway I've had from this entire conversation and the time that you and I have been talking about this, I hope it's a good takeaway for the audience as well.
That's exactly right. Just a little planning goes a long way.
Agreed. All right, Tyler, we got one question that you want to tackle live.
I think, Lucy, you talked a little bit about this sort of at the outset of the presentation when you were talking about IT and potentially the shift that's happened around who's involved in legal ops. But let's talk again about ownership and really put a fine point on it. Who should own CLM implementation among a whole host of stakeholders?
Oh, back to this. I feel like, I mean, you didn't like my it depends answer. I got you. I see what you're doing here. Let's say legal's gonna own it. And let's make the case for legal owning it. How about that? Whether in theory they should or shouldn't doesn't matter. Oftentimes they just end up owning it. And that's a reality. So let's deal with that. The pitch for, of course, legal owning it is oftentimes in most companies, contracts are perceived as a legal thing. Everything about the contract's legal. So it allows legal to actually influence how the entire contracting life cycle works across the company. It allows legal to push some obligations, bad word, empower. It allows legal to empower the business to play a more active role because we know legal while it should own, should own, let's say, CLM technologies, it should not own the signature process. It should not own the search and retrieve functions. Your legal half the time is playing Fido, run, fetch it, good boy, good girl. And that's insane. That's crazy. So by owning the CLM technology and by, implementing it, they can use it to force some of the changes that maybe would have been harder to do without the technologies. So as long as legal has the support of the C-suite and the technical support of IT to do all the wonderful tech parts that need to be done if you're going for a full enterprise implementation, it really allows legal to step out of the time-wasting activities that they just shouldn't be doing. So that would be my pitch for why legal should own it, as one who actually embraced and adopted it myself when I was at Microsoft. And I had to say, okay, procurement, just stop, just let me do this. And they thankfully were like, amen, thank God, take it. Because we don't want to do it because, again, contracting is a legal thing. So we kind of just leaned into it. We just, again, right or wrong, philosophy doesn't matter. We leaned in and we're able to then influence how it works better for everybody. From our vantage points, at the end of the day, we have such a, and legal is one of the only functions of the ones that were asked, who should own it. Legal has a veto power unlike any other, not even finance. Legal can just swoop in and stop deals. So that gives you a bit of a leverage to say, look, I'm just going to own CLM because at the end of the day, I'm going to end up anyway influencing these contracts. So that's
I think you raised an earlier point around like, what does it mean to own? And I think that could vary from organization to organization, but it's necessary to be clearly defined from organization to organization. In one of my prior roles, which I shall not name specifically, but there was a purchase of a CLM tool that was championed by one group, but there was no, in the implementation side, there was no real clear ownership around who would be doing what. And most of these pieces of software are configurable to the point where different people can have different levels of access, and that can wreak havoc on your entire ecosystem if different people are allowed to do different things in things like workflows and templates and launching new workflows. If there's not a regimented fashion in which that is done, you're going to have utter chaos, which is what we had. And it took us a year to climb out of that. So
yeah, you need a control. So you need stakeholders, you need champions, you need people part of the decision, part of the planning, part of the implementation, and you need control and rules. You can't have it all. You can't be a complete democracy. We're all in. It is not a communal, open source type of a relationship with your CLM system. But everybody needs to chime in. Everybody gets a say. Some say is worth more than others. All that's very transparent. Good project management, by the way, worth its weight in gold. 100%. You need tight project management on any type of system implementation. So if legal, you're the owner, legal, you are not an excellent project manager. Dear department, you just aren't. So find a PM that will have your back, because that's what this comes down to. Which decisions are being made by whom, on what day, who's in the meeting. That tight project management rigor really helps set the tone for how the whole thing's going to then operate. And by the way, a good project manager will lead you into a good program. Because when you implement a CLM system, newsflash, dear law department, you are now birthing an operation.
Yeah.
You didn't know you were, you thought you're buying a tool. Buying a tool, that's yesteryear. That is not accurate. You don't buy tools. You are launching a full CLM operation the minute you have a CLM system. Yeah. And that requires different skills, different people. Whole other webinar we can do on that.
Yeah. Very cool. We have a few more questions, Tyler. Should we take those?
Yeah. And then let's turn to Bill's question. Bill's a GC. I'm glad he joined today. How do you tackle customers trying to do more with a CLM than, let's say, the functionality that the CLM system provider has designed or their product managers are thinking about? Lucy?
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Customers trying to do more than CLM. Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually say that we see customers try to do CLM in other systems for sure. Everybody's in Salesforce trying to do CLM, Coupa, Reba, all of those. And then some of those have built CLM systems and tacked on. So there's always that. But yes, we also then see, hey, if I'm investing so much money in the CLM system, can it also? Not a successful path. A good CLM system implementation is hard enough for just contracting lifecycle management. That is hard enough, especially if you're going to get into substantive inside the four corners stuff and using the system to look at the words and find other words and compare words and draft words and suggest you words inside the four corners and draft. That substantive stuff is already challenging, more than pure workflow and automation of administrative, procedural steps. If you're going to layer on top of that to try to use that stuff inside for the purpose of privacy and compliance and regulatory, I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it until you are locked and loaded on how your CLM system is smoothly working for what you had intended it to do.
Maybe I'll expand on Connie's good question in here a little bit and say maybe not just for those folks who are without an in-house legal team, but even if you just are a smaller company or you have a smaller team, GC plus or in-house lawyer plus contracts manager, legal ops manager, differences that you see in this process and what they need.
Funny you say that because I did a talk on CLM readiness for small law departments with In-House Connect, which is a useful platform for those of you who are in-house. Free platform. But we did, and it was one of their top 10 webinars from last year, which I was delighted by, because when you think small, you're not thinking volume and numbers and winning any sort of a race or competition of popularity, but small and mighty, and most law department, most legal professionals, for instance, who go to the Association of Corporate Counsel, they're in small law departments. So yes, the approach is a little bit different. The concepts are still the same. You still have to have rules for when you solo GC review contracts, or you with no GC. When do you engage a law firm? Cha-ching. You better be thinking of what you're sending to that law firm and why they're reviewing every contract. So always start with the policy and the why. I know it sounds philosophical, like, why does it matter? I need a tool, but you may not need a certain type of tool or a complex enough tool. If you're going to reduce from 50 contracts a week to 3, you can use probably a different system. So still the same methodology, then, again, the people. So you do have one lawyer, no lawyers. Who else at the company can be playing a role in the contracting lifecycle? Who should be? How do you educate them? How do you use your legal resources, external or internal, effectively to educate somebody else? And think about, again, the people and the natural process, the workflow. Why does contracts go to where they go? Approvals are my favorite example. Who's approving this deal before it becomes a contract? A contract is a manifestation of a deal. It is a written version of a deal. Who agreed that that's the right money to spend or the right revenue to receive in the right fashion for that type of service? So much of that ends up coming to legal when they're reading a contract. We're like, why did we even agree? We can't even do what we're agreeing to. Who said this was okay? That's where that process comes in, because it is combining the people and the rules of your company. So similar methodology, I would say, just might look a little bit different if you're small.
I know we are approaching time. We've got still a few more questions. Maybe
let's go over. Fine. Yeah.
Go over. Is that fine with both of you?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's go to the workflows question. How do you think about different approval stages, especially when the lawyer isn't the one who's evaluating the vendor or isn't in there talking to the vendor about functionality? I mean, we hear this a lot with AI-related features and upsells that are happening today too. Both your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
I'm happy to kick it off.
Yeah, please.
Approvals is exactly, that is that dreamy process mapping exercise that we love to do. We love to come in and write out the flow, the contract flow. And we like to push on the question of, what does it really mean when you say approve? How many times in-house do we get can I sign this? Did legal look at this? Well, what does that mean? Look at it. What does approve? What does approve? And who's got the right to approve? And who's got the right to say no? Stop. So the way to think about approvals is it is a very clear process flow based on some parameters. Again, it goes back to the rules, policies. Does finance have a rule around deal making? Does finance have a rule around revenue recognition? It requires to step back and actually map. Once you map it, you realize, oh, why are they all touching this? Because we want their approval? No, we just like them to look at it. Well, what does that mean? We get that all the time. I'm like, well, stop, unless you really want their approval. So it's a really good exercise to put on paper, approval process.
I'm going to take the next two questions from Alfonso and Christian and combine them a little bit because we're seeing a lot of focus around AI. Where do you see CLMs headed? And as you think about the different use cases that AI, whether it's generative or it's some sort of machine learning, which both of you I know have thoughts on, as you think about those use cases, hey, what's really working today? Where is that successful as opposed to where might it be a little bit more marketing promises as opposed to product solutions?
I'll kick this one off. This is very, very near and dear to my heart for a variety of different reasons. I'm the son of an engineer. I think technology is incredibly important for human beings. That being said, we talked earlier about expectation and reality, and I think people need to understand what their expectations should be with respect to AI. It's a tool. There was a time when lawyers would go to the shelves in libraries to get their answers around certain legal questions. They would open up books and they would look through them. Well, in comes the internet and then Google, yeah, Lexis and Westlaw have online research. So you had that transition and they became a tool to increase productivity. And over time, as we learned to trust them, they increased accuracy, right? So they allowed us to do more. AI is absolutely no different. Will it become the Skynet Terminator thing that can do everything and solve all our problems? I have no idea. Like, I don't think we need to think about that right now. We can let Elon Musk and those talking heads worry about what AI becomes down the future. For lawyers, it's nothing more than a tool. What it doesn't supplant is your judgment. And we've seen that with our own AI products at SpotDraft, where customers are still they have a product that can review third-party contracts, but they still need their legal judgment in order to address what the output of that AI is. So that's where it's going. It's getting better, it's getting faster, it's getting more accurate. All of those things are happening, and that will continue to happen over time. But I think the evolution is really no different than the technology tools that we have in place today, which is that it will make you better at what you already do. So that's the way that I think about the evolution of AI, whether it's in the contracting space or not.
Yeah, AI is such a buzzword. It's such a buzzword. I would say stop shopping for AI. Shop for the solution you need. You should have some flavor of AI running somewhere underneath the hood. I don't care. If you're buying a car, I don't care what's under the hood. I mean, great. Tell me the features and I'll be excited that I'm getting all this amazing stuff, but I just need to know if it does what I need it to do. So I always have a very short-tempered answer when it comes to AI, only because I don't understand why suddenly lawyers are so deeply interested in something that is so deeply technical because of the frenzy around it. I would just say, who cares? Who cares what kind of AI it is? Or if it's even AI. And by the way, AI has been around for decades.
Yes.
It's not new.
Yeah.
So I would just say, stop worrying about it. And then once you've figured something out, then have the vendor explain to you how much AI they use and how exciting it is. You can funnel that up the chain and everybody will be delighted. But it's there in some shape or form these days.
There's like I think Lucy's absolutely right. E-discovery has been using technology-assisted review for 20 years. That's not new. It's the same thing. There's a question in here from a Lions fan who's probably trolling me for some reason, but that's fine. We're gonna have that game on Sunday. Who said, data and metrics and finding pain points with respect to your contracts. Yeah, looking across 10,000 contracts to get the kinds of answers that you want in certain kinds of relationships, that can be a painfully arduous and manual process without technology. So you can use technology and to some level of AI or machine learning to accelerate the findings that you need out of those contracts. But at the end of the day, the concept is just the same. Something else is looking at it for you, and you have to learn to trust it over time. You have to train it to give you the kinds of outputs that you want. But at the end of the day, it's still just a tool that increases your productivity and your accuracy.
That might be a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for all these questions. It's always great to have a super engaged audience, although I'm not surprised given our two panelists. And Akshay and Lucy, thanks so much for joining today and sharing all these insights with the whole legal ops, legal community. I think we might have to do a part two.
We'll figure out a good one. There was lots of good subtopics. Lucy, thanks so much. This was great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Everybody reach out with questions anytime, connect on LinkedIn, all the good stuff.
Likewise. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.